Claire Morgan stood at the kitchen sink on a calm Sunday afternoon, rinsing a coffee mug she had already washed once, not because it was dirty, but because her hands needed something to do. Outside, the street in their Oregon suburb was quiet, lined with maple trees slowly shedding orange and red leaves. The house felt too still. Her husband, David, had left early that morning for another business trip, and their son, Ethan, had barely looked up from his phone before saying he was bringing a friend home later. Claire nodded at the time, not thinking much of it. She had grown used to this life, routines, schedules, polite conversations, and long stretches of emotional quiet. She loved her family, truly, but love had slowly turned into responsibility, and responsibility had turned into silence. By the time the doorbell rang, she had already forgotten about it. When she opened the door, Lucas Reed stood there with Ethan, smiling politely, holding a small backpack over one shoulder. Lucas thanked her for letting him visit, his voice calm and warm, and something about the way he spoke, clear, respectful, present, made Claire pause for half a second longer than usual. She invited them in, telling herself she was just being polite. Inside, Lucas helped Ethan carry bags without being asked. He laughed easily, but not loudly. He listened more than he spoke. At dinner, he made eye contact when Claire talked, nodding, asking small questions that showed he was paying attention. It was nothing dramatic, nothing improper, but Claire felt a quiet shift inside her, like a window opening in a room that had been closed for years. She noticed herself sitting straighter, choosing her words more carefully, smiling without forcing it. She hated that she noticed. Lucas talked about college, about uncertainty, about wanting to do something meaningful but not knowing what that was yet. Claire related more than she expected. She remembered being young, full of ideas, believing life would stay wide and open. At some point, that openness had narrowed, slowly, without her noticing. When Ethan left the room to take a call, a brief silence settled between Claire and Lucas. It wasn't awkward. It was gentle. Lucas thanked her again for dinner, saying it felt good to be in a home like this. The word home landed heavier than it should have. Claire smiled, but her chest tightened. She told herself it was just kindness, just gratitude. Later, as she cleared the table, she caught her reflection in the dark window, older, yes, but still there. Still someone. That realization unsettled her. When Ethan and Lucas went upstairs, laughter drifting down the hall, Claire sat alone at the table, the sound of their voices fading into the house. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, not desire, not guilt, but awareness. A soft reminder that parts of her had been asleep, not gone. She told herself firmly that Lucas was her son's friend, that this feeling meant nothing, that she was reading too much into a normal moment. Yet as the evening passed, she found herself listening for his footsteps, his voice, his presence. When he said goodnight before heading to the guest room, he thanked her once more, his tone sincere, almost careful. Claire wished him good night and closed her bedroom door, leaning against it for a moment longer than needed. Her heart was beating faster, and she didn't understand why. Nothing had happened. Nothing was supposed to happen. But as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, she knew something had changed, not outside her, but within. A quiet line had been touched, not crossed, and the fact that she felt it at all frightened her. She promised herself it would end there, that tomorrow would be normal, that this was just a passing feeling caused by loneliness and memory. Still, as sleep finally came, one thought stayed with her, steady and unsettling. She had felt seen, and she wasn't sure she remembered the last time that had happened. Days passed after that first quiet evening, and Lucas continued visiting Ethan. More often, sometimes to help with homework, sometimes just to hang out. Each time he came, Claire noticed small details she hadn't before, the way he remembered her favorite tea, the way he asked about her day with genuine interest, the way he seemed to notice when she looked tired or distracted. It wasn't flirtation, at least not in any obvious sense, but it stirred a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She told herself it was harmless, just gratitude, just kindness, yet the truth was harder to ignore. Lucas's attention made her feel alive again, reminded her she was more than a wife or a mother. One rainy evening, Ethan had plans with friends and David was away on a work trip, leaving Claire alone with Lucas in the living room. The storm outside made the house feel smaller, cozier, intimate in a way she hadn't realized she craved. They talked about college, about dreams, about failures and fears, and for the first time in a long while, Claire shared thoughts she had kept to herself for decades, worries about being overlooked, about time passing too fast, about the quiet that had settled in her life. Lucas listened carefully, not interrupting, not judging, simply present. It felt comforting and frightening all at once. At one point, their conversation lapsed into silence, the kind that speaks louder than words. Their eyes met, and in that moment, a subtle, unspoken connection formed, something delicate yet electric, like a spark hovering just above the surface. Claire immediately looked away, scolding herself for noticing, for feeling, for letting this stranger, a boy who was just her son's friend, stir emotions she had buried long ago. She tried to keep the conversation light, steering it back to harmless topics, yet her heart refused to settle. Lucas left that night earlier than usual, thanking her again for her hospitality, and she forced a smile as she watched him go. After the door closed, she stood in the hallway, the house quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows, and felt an unfamiliar racing in her chest, a thrilling, confusing pulse that reminded her she was still capable of feeling deeply. She told herself it was nothing, that it was simply human to notice kindness, but when she lay in bed, she found herself replaying the evening, remembering every glance, every pause, every word. She realized it wasn't just appreciation she felt, it was longing, the kind of subtle, emotional thrill that comes from being truly seen, even if only for a fleeting moment. Days turned into weeks, and each visit brought the same gentle tension, a quiet awareness between them that neither could, or would, fully name. Claire began to notice herself smiling at his presence before he even arrived, arranging the living room so it looked welcoming, preparing little things she knew he liked without thinking, all while convincing herself she was just being hospitable. She found excuses to linger in the kitchen when he was there, to brush past him with casual touches, to laugh more freely than she had in years. Yet beneath it all, there was a persistent voice reminding her of boundaries, of morality, of loyalty, and that voice made the thrill all the more intense. One evening, the storm returned, darker and louder, knocking out the power and leaving only the flicker of candles. They ended up talking late into the night, deeper than before, sharing hopes, regrets, and confessions that had no audience but each other. The connection grew stronger, heavier, but still unspoken, wrapped in glances, pauses, and the weight of silence. When Lucas finally left, Claire sat alone in the dark, listening to the storm outside, feeling both exhilarated and guilty. She knew something had begun between them, though nothing had crossed the line, and the realization both frightened and thrilled her. That night, sleep was elusive, and when it finally came, her dreams were filled with moments of conversation, laughter, and the quiet intensity of a connection she hadn't expected, a bond that felt like a mirror, reflecting a part of herself she had long forgotten. By the time morning light crept through the curtains, she understood that life had shifted subtly but irreversibly, that the thrill of being noticed and understood had awakened feelings she would have to navigate carefully, balancing desire, morality, and the tender vulnerability of her own heart. Weeks turned into a blur of emotions for Claire, each day carrying the weight of the connection she felt with Lucas and the responsibility she held toward her family, creating a tension she could not easily escape. She went through her routines with a restless mind, noticing every little habit of Lucas's when he visited, every kind word, every patient question, every way he seemed to make her feel truly seen. The feeling was intoxicating but confusing. She loved her husband, valued her marriage, and adored her son, yet she could not ignore the emotional pull towards someone who was supposed to be off limits. Claire began reflecting deeply on her life, realizing that much of her emotional world had been muted over the years, quieted by obligations, compromises, and the steady rhythm of domestic life. Lucas's presence acted as a mirror, showing her parts of herself she had neglected, the desires to be admired, to feel vibrant, to engage with someone who paid attention not to her roles but to her essence. One afternoon, with Ethan at a friend's house and David away, she found herself in the living room with Lucas alone again. The air was filled with casual conversation, yet beneath it flowed an unspoken intensity. They discussed their dreams and fears, the conversations becoming confessions about life's uncertainties. Lucas admitted he was unsure of his path, worried about becoming invisible in the world, and Claire felt an unexpected sympathy that merged with her own self-reflection. In that moment, she realized that the thrill she felt was not simply about attraction, it was about being recognized, being acknowledged in a way that was rare and precious. She noticed how Lucas's attention lingered in small gestures, a reassuring smile, a quiet acknowledgement, the way he remembered what she said from weeks ago, and it stirred a profound emotional longing she had suppressed for years. Yet, the reality of the situation was unavoidable. Lucas was her son's friend, young, impressionable, and entirely inappropriate as a romantic or emotional partner beyond friendship. The realization struck her with clarity, forcing her to confront the line she could not cross. As days went by, Claire observed herself becoming more introspective, more aware of how much she had sacrificed her own needs for the sake of family comfort, how loneliness could sneak in unnoticed despite being surrounded by love. She began journaling, reflecting on her feelings, attempting to make sense of the confusing thrill and emotional tension that Lucas's presence had brought into her life. Each visit from him became both a joy and a test, a reminder of what she wanted from life and what she needed to control to preserve the integrity of her family. Eventually, she found the courage to speak with him directly. In a quiet moment, she expressed her awareness of the bond that had formed, acknowledging that it was intense but could not go further. Lucas, surprised but understanding, admitted that he felt the same, that he had struggled with his emotions because he respected her and her family too much to act on them. The conversation, though difficult, was liberating. It allowed both of them to recognize their feelings without crossing boundaries, to accept that some connections are valuable precisely because they illuminate truths without causing harm. Claire reflected on what she had learned, that emotional neglect could create longing, that fleeting moments of understanding could be powerful, and that personal awakening did not have to lead to mistakes. She resolved to communicate more openly with David, to address the gaps in their emotional connection, to restore intimacy and attention in ways that strengthened their marriage. Lucas's visits became lighter, more casual, grounded in friendship rather than unspoken tension, and Claire embraced the clarity she had gained. The experience, though brief and fraught with complicated emotions, had shown her the depth of her own desires and the importance of being seen, reminding her that personal fulfillment and emotional awareness were essential parts of life. By acknowledging her feelings and acting with integrity, Claire felt stronger, wiser, and more capable of nurturing her family while honoring herself, understanding that some challenges in life do not require action but reflection, and that emotional awakenings could exist safely within the boundaries of respect, care, and honesty. Months had passed since Lucas's visits had stirred the quiet corners of Claire's heart, and the house that once felt still now felt subtly alive, though in different ways. The thrill that had once made her pulse quicken had softened into a gentle awareness, a reminder of her own emotional depth and capacity to feel beyond routine. She moved through her days differently, noticing small joys she had overlooked before, a warm cup of tea in the morning, the crisp autumn air through an open window, the sound of Ethan laughing with friends. Her relationship with David had also shifted. Conversations became more intentional, more present, as she shared feelings she had long kept buried, expressing both her longing for connection and her desire to strengthen their bond. David, attentive and willing, responded with empathy, and together they began to rediscover the subtle intimacy that comes from being truly seen and heard by someone who knows you best. Claire reflected often on Lucas, recognizing that the experience had not been about betrayal but about awakening. His presence had acted as a mirror, revealing gaps in her own life and showing her that emotional neglect, even when unintended, could create vulnerabilities and stir feelings that were confusing yet illuminating. She realized the thrill had never been solely about him, but about the rediscovery of her own vibrancy, the acknowledgement that she was still a person with desires, dreams, and emotions deserving attention. Sometimes she remembered the quiet evenings spent talking with Lucas, the storm outside, the candles, the pauses and glances that had seemed electric at the time. Those moments were now memories, not regrets, proof that connection could be meaningful without overstepping boundaries. Claire found herself acting more confidently, more purposefully, investing energy into friendships, hobbies, and her family, all while maintaining awareness of her own emotional needs. The experience had taught her that longing does not always require action, that some bonds exist to illuminate truths rather than alter lives directly. Ethan noticed the change in her, commenting that she seemed happier, more present, more herself, and even David remarked on the subtle lightness in her demeanor, unaware of the emotional journey she had traversed. Claire understood then that growth often comes from unexpected sources, that lessons in feeling alive and valued can emerge from brief but impactful encounters, and that self-awareness and honesty are keys to navigating complex emotions responsibly. She carried the memory of Lucas with gratitude, not shame, recognizing that his visits had catalyzed reflection and awakening rather than temptation or loss. In quiet moments, she would smile to herself, remembering the thrill not as a transgression but as a signal, a gentle nudge that life could still surprise, that her heart was capable of depth, and that she could honor her emotions without compromising her integrity. By the time winter approached, the house felt full in a different way. Laughter, conversation, and intentional connection had replaced monotony and quiet, and Claire felt steadier, stronger, and more emotionally alive than she had in years. She realized that some experiences, even fleeting ones, could leave lasting impressions not because of what they were, but because of what they revealed about oneself. Lucas had gone on with his life, distant yet remembered, and Claire continued hers with renewed purpose and clarity, understanding that the true thrill had been the awakening itself, the recognition of her own worth, the acceptance of her emotions, and the courage to live with honesty, love, and intentionality. In that awareness, she found peace, knowing that life was still full of potential, connection, and the quiet magic of being truly seen, and that she would never again ignore the voice inside her that reminded her she was alive, capable, and deserving of attention and care in every aspect of her life.